There's something you watch that you'll never admit to, not to your partner, not to your therapist, not even to yourself, not fully. It might be a genre you think is too rough or too taboo. It might involve fantasies that contradict your politics, your values, your carefully curated image of what it means to be a good person. You're not alone. In a world that preaches sex positivity, the truth is, we're still quietly ashamed of what turns us on. We say we're open-minded until desire gets weird. We say we accept each other until we stumble upon a partner's search history. We say, as long as you're honest with me, but what we often mean is, be honest, as long as it doesn't make me uncomfortable. So here's the question. Why do we watch porn that we know our partner would judge us for? And deeper still, what does that say about us? This isn't just about taste. It's about fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear that your inner world, your unspoken fantasies, are somehow incompatible with being loved. Psychologically, desire is rarely straightforward. Freud believed that the erotic mind is a battlefield of repression and release. Jung, in contrast, saw fantasy as symbolic, a kind of secret language through which our unconscious speaks. What you watch, when no one is looking, isn't necessarily who you are, but it is something your psyche is trying to show you. Think of it like this. You might fantasize about domination, not because you want to be harmed, but because you're tired of always being in control. You might watch taboo roleplay, not because you believe in it, but because it symbolizes freedom from your moral rigidity. You might crave what's wrong, because it's the only place you feel free to stop being so right. Desire, in this sense, is a psychological escape hatch. It allows you to slip out of the roles you've been trained to play: the respectful husband, the responsible mother, the kind and agreeable partner, and into something primal, raw, and undisciplined. But here's the paradox. The more shame we attach to these fantasies, the more power they gain. Shame doesn't purify desire, it mutates it. When you can't admit what excites you, even to the person you love, that desire becomes a hidden world, one you have to sneak off to. That secrecy breeds distance, and distance breeds confusion, resentment, and ultimately, disconnection. What many couples don't realize is this: the problem isn't the porn, it's the silence around it. You're not ashamed because your tastes are twisted. You're ashamed because you were never given the language to talk about desire honestly, without fear of being mocked, rejected, or pathologized. In most cultures, we're taught that love should be gentle, predictable, monogamous, and neat. But desire? It's messy, non-linear, wild. And while love brings us closeness, desire thrives in space, in the unknown, the untamed. That's why the porn we hide often reveals a kind of inner exile. We want our partner to see us, to really see us, but we're terrified of what they'll find. And so, we create two selves: the partner who is safe, and the version of us that seeks out pleasure in the dark. But this division is unsustainable. As the philosopher Michel Foucault once said, "Where there is power, there is resistance." The more we pretend our fantasies don't exist, the louder they become. Not because we're perverse, but because we're human. Desire is not a betrayal of love, but silence can be. So what do you do with the part of you that longs for something your partner might not understand? So what happens when your private world of desire begins to feel incompatible with your relationship? When you start hiding things, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation? This is the reality for many people. It's not that they want to betray their partner. It's that they fear being seen and not accepted. And so they compartmentalize. One version of themselves for the relationship, another for desire. This split is more common than most couples realize. In therapy offices, behind closed doors, people admit to watching things they would never dare discuss. Some hide their viewing habits like secrets that could destroy everything. Others convince themselves it doesn't matter. It's just a video, just a passing thought. But it always matters. Not because it's wrong, but because secrecy, when paired with shame, becomes corrosive. You start to believe that your inner world is too strange, too unlovable, too risky to share. What's tragic is that many of these fantasies are not as alien or monstrous as people fear. In fact, they're often rooted in emotional truths that aren't being spoken. Fantasies about submission can come from exhaustion, a longing to let go, to stop performing. Fantasies about being objectified can emerge from a life of feeling overlooked, an unconscious desire to be seen so intensely that it borders on worship. And the fantasies that shock us the most, they're often the ones closest to our deepest psychological needs. Carl Jung argued that the parts of ourselves we disown, the shadow, don't disappear. They show up in dreams, in impulses, in fantasies. What you hide from the world doesn't go away. It grows stronger in silence. And porn, for many people, becomes a safe and anonymous space to let those shadows speak. But here's the problem. When the private world of porn and fantasy becomes too cut off from the relational world, you start living in emotional isolation. You might still love your partner. You might still laugh, talk, raise kids, share meals, but there's a growing canyon between who you are with them and who you are when you're alone. And the longer that canyon stretches, the harder it becomes to bridge. Some people try to compensate by overperforming intimacy. They become overly affectionate, attentive, sexually available, but only as a mask. Others withdraw entirely, too afraid to reveal what they actually want. And so both people in the relationship suffer. One feeling unloved and confused, the other feeling trapped inside a desire they can't name. It's worth asking, why are we so afraid to tell our partners what we really want? The answer, more often than not, is fear of being shamed. Even in loving relationships, the moment we express something that deviates from the norm, we risk being labeled as perverse, emotionally damaged, or worse, disloyal. But what if the act of revealing your fantasies isn't a betrayal, but an invitation? What if it's not a threat to intimacy, but a bridge toward deeper connection? There's no guarantee your partner will understand. No guarantee they'll feel safe or comfortable with everything you reveal. But openness, even when it's awkward, even when it's messy, allows for a kind of relational honesty that secrecy can never create. And sometimes, it's in that awkwardness where real intimacy begins. Not in perfection, not in compatibility, but in vulnerability. Esther Perel, the renowned psychotherapist, often says that we expect one person to give us everything: security and novelty, stability and excitement, love and lust. But no one person can fulfill every part of you. And that's not a failure of love. That's just the complexity of human desire. So maybe the porn you watch that your partner wouldn't understand isn't a betrayal. Maybe it's a map to unmet needs, unexplored parts of yourself, forgotten curiosities. Maybe the goal isn't to erase the fantasy, but to understand it, to ask, what is this really about? What am I seeking? And is there a way to bring even a part of this into my relationship? Because the truth is, you don't need to act out every fantasy. You don't need your partner to enjoy every kink or genre, but you do need space to be honest. You need the freedom to speak your inner world without the fear of exile. Otherwise, you'll keep returning to that dark corner alone, carrying both the desire and the shame, and eventually, the silence will say more than the fantasy ever could. Let's be honest, desire was never meant to be tidy. It doesn't follow rules. It doesn't read etiquette manuals. It certainly doesn't care about your couple's therapist's opinion. Desire is raw, unpredictable, and sometimes deeply inconvenient. And yet, we often expect ourselves and our partners to keep it neatly boxed, sanitized, and fully compatible with romantic love. When it's not, we panic, we feel guilty, or worse, ashamed. But here's a truth that most people are too afraid to say out loud. Your desire is not a moral failure, even when it doesn't match your partner's, even when it scares you, even when it shows up in forms you don't understand. Desire isn't a verdict, it's a message. And like all messages from the unconscious, it's often messy, symbolic, and layered. Sigmund Freud, often criticized but never irrelevant, once suggested that fantasies are the disguised fulfillment of wishes, not always literal, but meaningful nonetheless. That humiliation kink, it might not mean you actually want to be hurt. It might be a complicated metaphor for surrender, for release, for being freed from the burden of always being in control. That strange fixation on watching instead of participating, it could reflect a deeper emotional distance you've never had words for, or a longing to be close without risk. And here's where the conversation gets difficult, but also beautiful. Because if we stop treating our fantasies like sins, we can start treating them like clues. Clues that guide us toward parts of ourselves that were never given space. Clues that say, here is where I need to be touched. Not just physically, emotionally, spiritually, but what happens if your partner can't or won't go there with you? That's where the real philosophical question arises. Can you be in a relationship where part of your desire must remain hidden? Can love survive the compartmentalization of the self? Or is secrecy, even polite, well-intentioned secrecy, a slow form of erosion? Martin Buber, the Jewish philosopher, believed that true love requires an I-thou relationship, not an I-it. In other words, we don't just love someone by being kind or staying loyal. We love them by seeing them fully, by allowing them to exist in their wholeness, even when that wholeness is unfamiliar, especially then. But in reality, few of us feel safe enough to live that way. We worry about rocking the boat, being misunderstood, breaking the illusion of compatibility. So we stay quiet. We edit ourselves. We perform the version of us that seems easiest to love. And ironically, this is where distance begins, because it's not porn that ruins intimacy. It's the silence around it. It's the fear of being known too well. And the longer you avoid revealing who you really are, the longer you pretend your sexual inner world doesn't exist, the more alone you feel, even in bed, even during sex, especially during sex. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a challenge, one that's not about acting on every fantasy or expecting your partner to meet every need, but about courage. The courage to name what lives inside you, the courage to explore what scares you, not because it's shameful, but because it's sacred. The courage to risk being seen in your complexity and to extend the same compassion to your partner. Maybe your tastes will never fully align. Maybe there will always be fantasies that belong only to you. That's okay. The goal isn't total sexual synchronicity. The goal is emotional honesty. The goal is to know and be known without punishment. Because when you can say, here's what I secretly crave, and the person across from you doesn't flinch, something profound happens. You begin to heal, not just from shame, but from the deeper belief that you are too much, too strange, or too broken to be loved as you are. That's what true intimacy is. Not agreement, not sameness, but presence. And if we can bring that kind of presence into our relationships, even just a little, we may find that the truth we were most afraid to speak is the very thing that sets us free.